Hello! In this science episode, I want to go over some more fun quirks about signalling. So first, let's start by going through the basic types of signal, ignoring the sort of pre and combo signals. So you have the two-way block signal, the one-way block signal, the path signal, and the one-way path signal. So I'm going to set a train going on this track so I can show you what happens with this. So this train goes along here. You see it's just reserving tile by tile because it's block-based. So it only really makes its decisions at the signals or junctions. And you'll see that this signal's gone red here because this train is in this block, but it's green in the other direction because that block is free. The one-way signal, although the train's going this direction, will operate exactly the same way. So it's green because this block is free, and then this block is no longer free, so it's gone red. The other train would have to stop there. But, of course, because this is a one-way signal, when this train comes back, it will get all the way up to here, and then it will go, oh, and it will turn around. It will give up immediately, and it will turn around. So let's now try the regular path signal. So you'll notice immediately that this train reserved a whole path all the way up to the signal, and then again reserved a whole path all the way to the depot. And you may notice that slight slowdown. I think that's because the train's actually technically lost at this stage, so the reservation is slightly odd. Now, note this way round that it passes the signal from the back, but the path actually goes all the way. It doesn't stop at the back of the signal, it keeps going. So, slightly different to this here. Now, I'll show you why that matters in a little bit. But lastly, let's do the one-way path signal. Notice this train doesn't reserve all the way up until it passes here. So there's a slightly different behaviour, yet again, with this one-way signal. So now the train is going through to here, but it will return. It will reserve. Notice it reserved a path up to here, but then it can go no further. And then it gives up and it oscillates around there. And I want to show you something else fascinating with this. So I'm going to try to catch both of these trains on the block signal, two-way block signal, and the path signal at the same point. So notice that these are at about the same point. Okay, my stopping wasn't perfect. I'm now going to clone this train here. I'm then going to clone this train here. And I'm going to set them both going. And you might notice something quite different in the behaviour of the two. The block signal train went up to the block signal because, of course, these signals only work based on blocks. So this block was free, this block is full, so this train has stopped here. But this train had reserved a path. And because that path is reserved, this train cannot move. It says, I am going to remain stuck in the depot. You refuse to move. And this becomes sort of interesting later on. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself because there's something else that is perhaps worthy of note with this thing here. So this signal, obviously, it's sort of a two-way signal, but not quite. And if I were to provide the train with an alternative, where it could go round one of these signals in the correct direction, you see, this is an interesting... That happened because I was moving the network around. So, and then the trains, they cached their route. So that train had decided, well, I'm going to go around here. So you notice now that where I have two trains, but even if I were to send this one to the depot, you will see that this train will prefer not to pass this signal from the back. And that's because, while it can, it carries a penalty for doing so. And so if I were to remove that again, though to compare sort of the path costs of this, which you can get in sort of there's a debug mode which prints them to a text window. In this direction, the cost is about 1600. I think it's 1601 or something. However, when the train goes in the other direction, this has to reserve a longer path. So it's reserving more tiles, a longer path, but also having to reserve kind of through the back of this it is 3100, or 3101. So the path in this direction has a higher cost than the path in that direction. And that leads to some fun and games that you can play with these signals. So let me show you a wonderful quirk of passing the signal from the back. So here is my lovely two-way network signaled with path signals. I have a nice scenic route going in this direction, and then I have a nice direct route back. Let me start a train running along here. And can you guess what's going to happen? Yes. Why did that happen? Because the penalty for going through the back of that signal is not as large as the penalty for going all the way around this long detour. And in fact, if I add a second train, so this is going to have to wait for a path into the station, and then once it has its path, it's going to wander out. So that's ready there. So this train is going to come through here. But this train is sitting here waiting for free path because the penalty of this signal passing it from the back, the penalty of the fact that it's conflicting with another train, is still not quite so high that the train is willing to go and take this longer route. So in fact, what I would need here is to convert this to a one-way path signal, at which point the train will happily go round there. Because with the one-way, that simply isn't a route, whereas with that signal there, that can be passed from the back. Now, if I add more of them, because each signal passed from the back will carry a penalty, if I add more, we should see when this train comes back round here, that it becomes less willing to take that route. Yes, so notice by adding more signals, the penalty became larger, and the train decided, yes, I'm going to take this detour. This is a behaviour worth remembering. They're going to come back to this, because I'm going to show you something where this can actually cause quite some gameplay problems. This, incidentally, is why what I would call, for want of a better term, the Reddit station design works fine, even though these signals sort of face the wrong way. It's because they can be passed from the back, and actually specifically because they can be passed from the back, you'll see when the train comes into the station, it reserves the whole path into the platform. Although these are redundant, by the way. If you notice with this, when you miss them out on this compact terminus, you still have the same pathing behaviour, that the train will reserve its path all the way into the station, and then it doesn't reserve a path to get back out until it turns round. So, and usually you find with this, you give up a slight amount of throughput from that. However, something noticeable with this is this works because while there's a penalty for crossing this signal from the back, it's the same for both platforms. If I were to turn round one of these signals, even if it's the longer path, what you will see there is the train will now express a preference always for this platform, if it is available. So when it's not available, the penalty for the red signal and the blocked platform is high enough that the train will go into there. But it will, by preference, go for there because there's a lower penalty from going through that signal in reverse. Now, something else, though, that is worth noticing with that. So note when the train comes through here from the back signal, it reserves the path all the way into the platform. But when it comes through this front-facing signal, it reserves the path only up to the signal, and then reserves the onward path after it has left. And that can cause some interesting behaviour if there's not a free platform. So I'm now going to set this up. So this is blocked. There's a train in there. This train comes along. And it obviously, this platform's free and it's at a lower cost, so it will quite happily wander into there. I just want to pop that back in there, because I want to show you behaviour now. But this train, because it doesn't try to reserve the path all the way into the station, thanks to this signal, you now get a block here. So we now have a sort of good old-fashioned clock. Something else that we can do to resolve this clock. So I'm just going to put some track round here. Then I'm going to set this going. Now, I do have the setting enabled in this game, which allows trains to reverse at stations. But because this has a penalty for going through that in the reverse direction, this train will always prefer to go round the long way rather than turn around. Now, if I were to put some signals so that this had a much higher cost, we should hopefully see now the train goes, well, actually, I'd rather just go the shorter distance and pass the one signal from behind than pass all of these. So you see, this now returns it to going back in that direction. And in fact, if we do that, that will definitely prefer going in that direction. Yes, you see, yes, it definitely prefers going back in that direction, and we would no longer have any problems with if a train stops here, because if I stop a train here, you will now see that this, oops, and let's get that correct. Yes, this now, because this train cannot reserve its path here, it's going to sit here. I say I can't reserve a path. Something else, so no, and it's quite happily not going to reserve the path all the way through there. So, yeah, there we go. That is a little detour into that. Let's go back to these simple tracks, because the difference between block reservation and path reservation has some quite major consequences for this simple type of passing loop. So I'm going to set some trains running on each of these loops. The one with the two-way block signals, the one with one-way block signals, and the two variants of path signal. One-way and sort of one-way, but not if you really fancy going the wrong way through it. So these are going to wander out. And you notice the path signal versions, well, the trains are happily reserving paths through here, and they're running quite nicely and normally between these two stations. But these block signal versions have stopped, and they've stopped in different ways. So the one-way block signals, the trains have stopped at the signal. Whereas the two-way, this train is oscillating up and down. And you may wonder, why does it keep going back to this signal? Well, the solution is actually given in the one-way. This signal is red because this is all one block. So even though the train is up here, the signal says, well, the block is occupied, so this train cannot proceed. And the same is true of both these signals. This signal up here says this block is occupied, and the train cannot proceed. So this train goes, well, I'm not going all the way up there for that inconvenient red signal, when there is a far more convenient red signal nicely down here. And this, of course, doesn't happen to the path tracks, because as you see, these trains reserve independent paths, and this train can always reserve a path through here when the other train is reserving its path through here. You can see here, the paths do not conflict, so as this train wanders up here, this train is able to reserve a path into the station. Now, the next thing you might suggest is, well, can we mend this signalling? Can we put some signals there and some signals there? And would that mend this? And the same with the one-way. We put a signal there and the signal there. Would that work? And, well, yes, it does for these two trains. Let's add some more trains, because something kind of interesting happens, but it's not what you would think from just looking at this simple example. Let's do that, and let's do the same here. Let's add more trains to these as well. See how many make it out of the depot. Let's pause for that. So you can see what has happened here is we've ended up with one extra train has made it out the depot, and all of the others are not making it out because there's no free block for them to move into. And that's the key with this. This has each of these. Let me get rid of this to make sure they'll be exact. This has 4 blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4. And for each train, the train always needs a free block to be able to move into. So, this is why we can only have 3 trains on here. And this is one of those things which just happens to work, because the trains move quite quickly through here. If I were to stop this train here, and then allow this train to go past, this block now is free, and another train enters. And now there are no free blocks for any trains to make their way out of the block they're currently in. So we have deadlocked this, we have jammed this. And so if you build something like this, you actually have to be very careful as to how many trains you put on it before you exhaust the number of blocks. You'll also notice that the path-based signal ones, even though I added all those trains, still only have 2 trains running. And this is because these paths are getting reserved. So there is no point at which this train does not have a path reserved. Now we might be able to fiddle this into letting an extra train out. There we go. So we now have 3 trains running on this. Now what happens here? Do we see chaos? Well, no, we don't see chaos. And the reason we don't see chaos is because this train can reserve a path which does not conflict. And because this signal lets it stop in a place where it doesn't overhang either, that works with 3 trains. It works quite happily. Now, of course, we can also set this up so it has signals at the entrance and exit, and that should hopefully work just as well. Makes it slightly easier. But you'll see here that this train is now still reserving this path here. Now, can we get really ambitious? That is a question. Can we try to add another train to the path signal layout? Will that work or will it break? Let us see. So we've now added yet another train. This may be the breaking point. Yes, so this also will deadlock. And the reason it deadlocks is because this train can come here and it can overhang the junction. So this is also one of those rare signal after junction cases where if you build this passing loop, you want to make sure that your trains can always stop without overhanging it. And this should work out nicely now. The throughput will be a little bit slow, but it still works. You can see we've actually got 4 trains packed onto there. We could do the same thing with the one-way path signals. Now, this wouldn't be a science if we didn't have an experiment, so what we should have a look at is what are the throughput consequences of this, other than, of course, 0 in the case of the clogged junction. Here we have the familiar old lab with a new experiment, which are 5 different types of passing place. So there's this 2-way block signalled passing place, this 1-way block signalled one, this entry and exit path signal, this full path signal, and then in the middle, this path signal's in the middle. So this design and this design are potentially clog prone. This one has been made slightly less clog prone by extending the passing base so the trains can actually pass. But speaking of clog prone, we have problems with these. It's not fair to test those in their current state at all. Because if I let trains to go, look at what happens. Total disaster. In both cases, because there's a train here which does not have a free block to exit. So, in order to make these work, we actually need to signal them slightly differently. So, I shall reset the board and I shall show you how that should work. In order for this to work, we need to use the magic of entry and exit signals. So I'm going to set this train going so I can demonstrate with what needs to happen. So as you see, this train can enter, there's only it, so it enters these 3 blocks. But it's possible that it could enter this block while there's a train here and a train here waiting to go, and then you have a deadlock. So what we need is to make sure that this train cannot go into this block unless it can exit it. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to use the entry and exit signals. So we're going to make these exit signals, which means that the train does not enter it unless there is a gap free. And I do that by making these entrance signals. So this signal will only be green if this exit signal is green. And so let's let that train load, come back the other way, and we shall see as it turns around and goes up the other way that this is green because this is green. And then as soon as the train goes into this block, this remains red. A train would wait here, and so this block would be free for trains coming the other direction. However, you may now think, well, surely we can do this in the other direction. But if I were to do that, and I made this an exit signal, this suddenly turns green. And the reason for that is this doesn't care that this is a 90-degree turn, that the train can't make it. It just goes, well, it's totally fine. The train might pass through there. So this still needs to be a regular signal. We can only make these entry and exit in one direction. So the question there is, how do we handle the last block? Well, this becomes an entry signal. And then just this one signal here becomes an exit. And this again means a train will not enter here unless this exit is free. So if I do that from this side as well, the same setting. So I should now be able to run mini trains on that. But what about this two-way? Well, this will not work as well. This, because the trains can go in different directions. And I will try my best. I will try my best to set this up so we can leave it fairly free. So again, same thing. So let's not construct unnecessary signals. There we go. So that is going to be an entry signal. And then these here become entries. And then these here become exits. So let us see if this works as well. I think this still has quite a big potential to clog. From this, I think trains will just go round it in different directions if they can't find a path. But this one seems to be working quite nicely. Though you will note there's not very many trains on it. And that's because it's very hard for a train to exit the depot. So we might not be looking at particularly good throughput. We can see here, this is sort of working okay. Except for one problem. This bit isn't working. So because this is red, this seems to act as enough of a penalty to the train that it goes, well, I'll just go to this convenient red signal instead. So this, unfortunately, cannot be an entry and exit signal. This has to be a regular old signal. And this is likely to cause clogs. Yes, you see there. We have cloggage. So for this setup is actually going to be particularly bad because we are going to be very limited in the number of trains we can run on it. In fact, we probably can only run, let's say maybe 4 trains. Let's see if we can get away with 4 trains without total cloggage. Yes, that appears to mostly work. No total cloggage there. But again, that's going to be very limiting for throughput. Whereas these, although they're more clog prone, they will happily allow more trains to run. So let's set that up. Let's set those running. Let's make sure we don't get too many horrible cloggages on here. We see this one, yes. It could potentially clog, but it's doing okay. This one is fine. This one is actually completely clog safe because there's always a place for a train to wait. And this one, again, is more or less clog safe. We've extended these routes so that a train here doesn't overhang this. Again, this is one of those cases where signal after a junction actually can be problematic because it could cause the train to block this. But that goes back to the rule that we had earlier. This is interesting. This has already failed now that this entry is here. So I'm going to just remove that to a regular signal. Again, it's the same as we did sort of over there. And hopefully this will allow this. No, this just reclogs. So again, we have a similar problem that trains, ultimately, these will just clog. They will run for a certain amount of time, but ultimately they will clog. They can and will. So I'm going to stop those trains. I'm going to send this train back to the depot. And then everything should start running okay again. But again, we're very limited in how many trains we can have on this network. or it will just clog. So these are not going to be good with throughput. So anyway, so let's reset this scorebook. Let's let that run for a few months while looking through this. So while this is running, yes, these are now running okay, but you see how few trains we had to put on. And there's still a possibility for this to clog, because it's still possible if all the trains arrived at the same point, then they might. So these are not fail-safe designs. As soon as you have more than 2 trains, they can clog. These ones are a bit better, these path-based ones. You can see these are running much more trains. They've not had to be kind of babysat as much as the others. Let's have a look at those scores. See what's happening throughput-wise. So some very low numbers compared to what we're used to. So those sawmills. So the one-way block is doing 476. So it's just 3 trains. I think that's down to how limited it is in trains. Could we get another one on there? Maybe. Let's see if it clocks. So the two-way block, 504. Now the middle signalled one, 574. And the entrance and exit sawmill, 602. So these path signal layouts actually have a very good throughput bonus. And then finally this one, although it looks like it can handle more trains, there's so much slowing down that it actually is worse. It's actually 518. It's nearly as bad as the block signalled variant. So let's go have a look now at this. So I've added one more train to that. So I want to see if that comes up to the same throughput. So there we go. No, the one-way block sawmill is still relatively slow. And that's kind of it. And it's doing, yes, still worse than the two-way. And I think this is the two-way just gains a little advantage from trains being able to go in a different direction. But yes, you see with this that the better way signalling is actually this path block. And surprising even me, this is better than having the signals at both the entrance and exit. In this case, I mean, the path reservations seem to be a bit smarter when you only have these signals at the exit of each. So, that's some science. We found that really, as well as all of the pain with these clogging with the block signals, that even once you have them working, the path signal throughput is just that much higher. And it's supporting, notice it's not supporting any more trains on this one. This one still only supports 4 trains. But we have a much better throughput, those 4 trains moving more efficiently. Now, before we came here and experimented, we talked about the penalty for passing non-one-way path signals from the back, and how those can produce some interesting results. Well, there's one last thing to show here, and it's something which can cause very, very large problems on a network. Here is a very nice simple bit of double track. They're going to set some trains running on it. Notice it's signalled with path signals, but these special you can cross from the back path signals. So these trains are going to wander out into this station, and then they're going to wander along here. It's perfectly fine. This one's going to reserve its path totally fine and then wander off. So it's going to have to wait for this signal, but that will be okay. And then I think we get another train will come out of the depot. Oh, all looking okay. These trains are proceeding along here nicely. And then this train will go. And then something wild happens. This train just went completely rogue. Or rather, it didn't so much. Because the situation that was happening up here is there were quite a lot of red signals. And there was quite a lot of track reserved. And there were quite a lot of block trains and paths to conflict. And this train just decided, well, why would I ever bother with going down this route, which has loads of penalties, when this route just has a very simple 1, 2, 3 signals that I pass from the back, and it's completely free. And that's why you see that behaviour with these sort of pass from the backable path signals in that sort of network, where sometimes a train just goes and it blocks the entire track in the wrong direction, because it goes, well, this track's busy and I'd rather pass a signal from the back than do that. So how can you solve that? Well, the first option is simply to signal at higher density. So this, you'll see if I speed this up, all of these trains now are quite happily going along this path. They're not going and sort of going, oh, but this one looks like it's tempting and easy. And the reason for that is because now there's much greater signal density. That means there's many more signals that have to be passed from the back if you're going along this line. At that point, the penalty becomes high enough that the trains go, well, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to wait in turn for the other track to be free. However, this, while it's massively reduces the chances of that happening, does not totally eliminate it. So, in fact, the simple solution that you want is, regardless of signal density, use a one-way path signal. Either just one at the entrance and exit, which just prevents the trains routing from there, or just use the one-way path signal as a default signal, which is my playstyle. And now, rather than relying on a penalty, we are now telling the pathfinder, no, you absolutely cannot go in that direction. So even if I go back to the original signalling layout with the long gaps, you will see now on this that the trains will always try to go the correct route because they have no option but to, because this signal here says you cannot get to this station by following this track. And so what we will see is as these go past, rather than this train going, I can go to zoom along there, it correctly waits its turn for that. So that, if anybody ever wonders why you see me in my games tend to use one-way signals, it's because I've been bitten by this train decides to wander the wrong way up the tracks many a time. And it can happen especially, by the way, when trains are doing things like looking for depots. So it's quite possible to build a network where it works most of the time, and then a train decides to service at the wrong moment, and it all blows up. I hope that's been useful and interesting, and maybe demystified a few more strange signal situations for you. And as ever, if you have any ideas or things that you would like to see me test, or perhaps delve into the code and explain, please do drop them in the comments below. And as usual, sort of short, succinct and positive comments are thoroughly welcomed. Essays not so much. But until the next time, I shall see you in a future video.